In the last lesson, we went over the materials for the course, and now in this lesson, we're going to practice with ink. My best advice for drawing with ink is to practice drawing with ink. You can't go backwards. You can't edit. There's no undo when you're working with ink. So the more and more you get used to the fact that there isn't an undo button, the better you will be able to handle ink. So I'm going to show you how I use a brush with ink first. I'm going to open up the ink. You just open up your jar of ink and you'll find that there's this piece of almost like the top of a ketchup container. You take that off of your ink gently, and it's handy to have this piece of foam because it's almost like a washer. So you can put it back on the top of your ink and then tighten the lid so you can actually get it off again. And you will have less of a problem having it leak if you're putting it in your backpack or something. I'm gonna put this over the paper just in case I spill. I'm just gonna put a little bit of ink in my ink jar. And then I'm gonna put the piece of foam cardboard back on the top and I'm gonna tighten it up. Because I don't need very much ink. If you get ink in a larger jar, you definitely will not need to have a gigantic jar of ink on your table. So just set this aside and it's good to go. The first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna talk about the brush. I usually get the brush wet a little bit in the water just to get it moist. Dip it in the ink and just get the excess off on the edge of the jar. And when you hold a brush, I recommend not holding it like a pencil, but kind of forcing yourself to let it be perpendicular to the paper so you can get just the tip of the brush touching the paper. The first thing that I'd like us to try practicing is just light parallel lines. Drawing with the brush is kind of strange because it doesn't feel like you're actually touching the paper. So it really is just getting used to getting your hand and your eye to work together. But just doing nice thin lines. Try to control the line. It's important to doodle with it and to do things like this because the more you are able to summon the line that you want, the better you will be able to get the line that you want when you want it. So I recommend doing this often and just kind of practicing your lines. And I think that drawing parallel lines is really handy because it shows you what you're going to try to attempt by repeating the pattern. And if your hand shakes a little bit, that's okay. A lot of really great cartoonists have shaky lines. There's lots of ways of either covering it up or using it to your advantage. So after you do some thin lines like this, I would like you to practice doing some thick lines. So with a brush, you can actually press extremely hard on it, but I would just say try to let your hand, like the weight of your hand, push down. You can see that the line here is sort of getting a little thin, maybe just soaking up a little bit more ink when you try it again. Looks nicer. The black is blacker. One of the things I really like about a brush is that this same tool is able to do both of these lines without me having to go look for another tool. You can see that there's a little bit of grayness there, but it won't matter when we reproduce our comic. So after doing a bunch of these, we're going to try to combine both of these together. We're going to do a single line that's thin, then thick, then thin, then thick. So thin and then thick. So press up, kind of release it, and then press down again. Just try to get good at thinking of a line and getting that line out of the brush. To make it a little bit fun, whenever it was thin, I'm going to make it thick, and wherever it was thick, I'm going to make it thin. So just try to build up a pattern is what I'm going to try doing. This kind of doodling and this kind of practice where we're not trying to make it look like a pretty picture and just trying to practice what the tool is used for is really important. A brush can do more than just draw straight lines. It can draw really nice kind of curves. I'm just going to do some curly cues where it goes thin and then thick, kind of have it spin out and then thin and then thick. When the ink starts drying up on the brush, you'll get this sort of nice texture. We call that dry brush. The more you practice, the more you can do that without having to let the brush dry out. You can dry it out on the side, like on a towel or something. I'm going to keep drawing some curly cues. I go a little bit faster. One thing with the brush is that the more and more you practice, the more comfortable you will get at drawing with speed And drawing with speed will actually make your lines more confident and more crisp. I'm going to go pretty fast. And if your brush dries out too much, just dip it back in the water, it'll revive it, and we'll go back with ink again. One thing that's nice to practice is circles. Circles are a little bit difficult. You might find that the bristles, when you're traveling in that circle, they'll kind of wrap around themselves. So the more perpendicular you can keep your brush, the less that'll happen. But you can try drawing a circle in one pass and see how that works out for you. If it's difficult, you can also draw your circle with 2 half circles, like a half, and then come back with the other half. Sometimes what will happen is the bristles will wrap and then they'll kind of unwrap and spit ink across your page. You don't want it to happen. When you're done with your brush, it's really important to just rinse it out. So really get it in the water, get that ink out of it. Just think about it as if it's your hair. You don't want ink in your hair. You don't want to keep ink in your brush, so really give it a good rinse. And then on the paper towel, just wash it off a little bit. That's pretty good. But afterwards, when you're completely done for the day, I do recommend washing it with soap and water. There's also products like a brush conditioner, where it's nice for your brush to kind of condition it. The next thing that I'm going to talk about is drawing with a nib. I have my nib handle. This is an old one. The sets that I recommend, they come with a plastic nib holder, but just how they operate is basically the same. This is a bowl nib. This one's called a globe. It's also called a bowl point. But this is my favorite nib that comes with the Speedball set. It's very, very simple. It's sort of shaped a little bit like a spoon. So it has a C-shaped, and what you're going to do is you're going to put that metal into the holder and just push it in. With the plastic ones, there's a plastic circle that you push it inside of. Pretty easy. Just push it in until it seems like it's pretty firm in there. When you're drawing with a nib, it is very similar to drawing with a brush. It's also very pressure sensitive. You can see that it's concave and convex. The way that I like explaining it is if you can pretend that it's a spoon and then you can eat with it, then it's upside down. It has to be the bowl side towards the paper. If you look at your nibs, there is a hole, and this one it's shaped almost like a keyhole. That is your ink reservoir. That is where the ink goes. So you don't need to dip it into the ink any higher than the reservoir. So I'm gonna dip it into the ink just to fill up the reservoir. Like when you're blowing bubbles, like when you're a kid and you're dipping the wand into the soapy water, that's exactly the same thing. You just want to dip it into the ink and then have it fill up the reservoir. Wash off the excess on the side of your paper. And we're going to do the exact same thing like we did before, thin parallel lines. The difference is that when we were holding a brush, we were holding it perpendicular to the paper. But you hold a nib holder very similar to how you hold a pencil, so at a 45-degree angle to the paper, and you're always going to pull it towards the handle. You don't want to push your pen into the paper because it's a sharp piece of metal, so it might actually pierce the paper. It also doesn't feel very nice when that happens, so just try to remember to always pull the pen towards you. When you're drawing with a nib, you have that physical contact with the paper, and it feels really nice to draw. So just like we were doing with a brush, I'm going to do a thick line now. So you're going to let your hand, the weight of your hand again, kind of fall into the tip of the nib. When your nib doesn't have enough ink in it, it'll have these little itty bitty lines like that. That just is an indicator that you need more ink on your nib. And then I'm going to do the same thing that I did before with the thin and thick lines. So it's just thin, 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 and then thick, thick, thick. It's just good to doodle and to practice these lines. You could do the same thing that you were doing with the brush, drawing some curls if you want. It's a little bit more difficult because the nib doesn't have the give that a brush does. If you want to do complete circles, you will have to draw it in 2 different parts and just kind of connect the dots. When you try drawing it, you'll feel the texture of the paper and it actually feels kind of disturbing. So try to remember to piece it together. So I'm going to use a new piece of paper. You just rip this out. And I'm just going to draw a picture. I'm going to talk about the purpose of different types of lines. So I'm going to start by drawing a tree just because it was the first thing that I thought of. And I'm going to kind of start drawing with a slightly uniform line. I'll base the rest of it off of that. This is going to be like a doodle picture. Just like the brush, if you can start practicing drawing with speed, like drawing with a little bit of energy, you can start building up textures. Like in this tree, I'll start adding some texture marks of bark, and then it'll come into the grass. One of the most important things about drawing with ink in comics is getting good at drawing textures. If you get good at drawing textures, it's really helpful for filling in blank areas and describing things. Being able to quickly think about texture of grass. And a good way of getting good at drawing a certain texture is actually looking at the texture in your sketchbook and drawing grass. Or if you're going to draw maybe a sidewalk come through here, thinking about the texture of the sidewalk, and then having that contrast in texture really helps articulate what it is you're trying to draw. I just decided to add a character just to give it a little bit more life. A general thing that people talk about is atmospheric perspective. So as an object is closer to you, the lines that are being used to depict it can be slightly thicker. People can go a little overboard with it. You know, you can have super, super, super thick lines. But in my opinion, you can have a sense of space created just by a little bit of line variation. So this line that's depicting the leg here, having a thinner line depicting the grass behind it will let that rabbit kind of come forward. And you can really kind of go crazy with it. You can have like a rolling hill back here. Maybe the rest of the forest have trees that have a nice thinner line describing them going off into the distance here. And even not even completing a line is nice. Just the suggestion really works. In comics, you really don't need to draw every single detail. And sometimes the details that you leave out really give it the right atmosphere. I'm just kind of letting my pen kind of dance across the paper. I'm barely even pressing against it. I'm just letting the contact make the ink come out. You can have like a cloud kind of passing behind it. And then when you draw these trees or finish these trees, you can bring back the solid line. When you're working with atmospheric perspective, something that's really important is to let things overlap. If you're drawing part of a horizon line that's behind these trees, letting it pass behind the trees is important. Sometimes I shift my paper, sometimes I move the paper if that's helpful. But if I'm drawing the rest of this foreground tree and I don't want to move my paper, instead of trying to press into the paper, I'll just move my hand so it's actually the pen pointing in a different direction. Instead of pulling it towards me, I'm going to push it towards the end of the nib holder. And if you can kind of train yourself to do this, you can really move your pen in all sorts of directions and not have to keep rearranging your paper. I'm going to create a little mistake that I can correct. So if you accidentally spill ink on it, it might feel like it's the end of the world, but it isn't. So one thing, what I like to do is when I'm done with my nibs, is I will again put it in the water and then just wipe it off with a paper towel. You don't want your nibs to sit in water because they rust, so you don't want that to happen. We're going to use the bleed-proof white to fix this area. I think it's close to dry. So the way that it works is that you usually have to drop a little bit of water into the top of it just to mix up the top. I can see that there's a little bit of water in there, so I'm going to be able to use it without doing that. You just kind of mix up the top layer until it's about the consistency of ink. It's pretty good. And then you can use this just like you would use ink. I'm going to use a brush to show you how to use this. You just dip it in. It's just like white paint. When you're using correction fluid like whiteout or you're using bleed proof white, you want to wait until it's the last thing to do. So if you're erasing or anything like that, you don't want to erase on top of it because it'll turn into this mucky gray mess. So you just want to wait until it's dry, which it seems to be, and then apply it just like you would apply whiteout. You don't have to use it just as a correction. You can also letter with this. If you had a big black sign here that you wanted to say like welcome or something in neon lights, you could draw the black sign here and then you could do all the lettering with the bleed proof white. It works just like ink, so you can think about it subtractively as well. You want to put it on pretty thin, otherwise it gets kind of gunky, kind of messy. You can still see a little bit of gray there, but when it dries, if it is still like that, you can go back and use a little bit more. Otherwise, when you photocopy it, it probably won't show up at all. And then just like you were using ink, you want to wash off your brush in the water and then wipe it off with a paper towel. So to summarize, there's lots of ways of using ink. There's lots of ways of using the nib. You can use it to show textures. You can use it to show perspective by overlap and using line thickness to create that dimension. So now that I showed you how to use ink, in the next lesson, we're going to make some comics.